Tonight, the Electricity Company of Ghana indicted by utilities regulator for peddling falsehoods about true cause of worsening power crisis when he blamed outages on overloaded transformers.
Around this time of the day, that is when you know how overloaded the transformers are. We were putting ourselves together to fix this problem. You have a transformer sitting there, in your mind, it has 75% capacity. You go for routine servicing, you realize that it's now at about 95, 97. I keep saying there is no Dumsor.
We have details of the latest PURC regulatory order, which also revealed that ECG kept as many as 61 bank and investment accounts, contrary with agreement with the IMF for it to maintain just a single account. Plus, ECG board members scrambled to pay 5.8 million cedi fine out of their pockets for failing to comply with an order to produce a load management timetable.
If PURC decides to impose this charge on the company, ECG will be the one to just pay it. ECG pays. It comes down to the revenues that they collected from you and I as ratepayers, and they'll use that same amount payback. That would have detrimental effect for the operations or the service that they provide the consumer.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
And this is Joy 99.7 FM. It is a major developing story. Exposed. The case of the Electricity Company of Ghana that has tonight been indicted by the utilities regulator PURC for peddling falsehoods about the true cause of the worsening power crisis. ECG had blamed the outages on 630 overloaded transformers across the country. Listen to the managing director of the ECG, Samuel Dubik Mahama.
Let's say the teams are putting together the transformers for the injections in the areas that are overloaded. When they are done and we are ready to go into a certain area, we publish it on our website, we publish it on our social media handles, we try to make it circulate on all platforms. So we do our best to make sure that when we are putting those schedules out, we circulate it on social media so that everybody is comfortable enough. You know, I first of all told you that around this time of the day, that is when you know how overloaded the transformers are. We were putting ourselves together to fix this problem. We have the requisite materials, we have the requisite tools to do the injections as quickly as possible. I know the engineering team puts out these, these notices. If your customers are saying, if my customers are saying they didn't get them, then I'm sorry. But all maintenance schedules are put out there. I keep saying there is no Dumsor, but everybody wants to stay with the fact that there's Dumsor. If there's Dumsor, that means there's a generational gap or there's a generational problem. But we keep repeating that there's no generational issue. There's no generational issue. There's enough fuel. We are generating to the best of our ability. Now, with these localized issues, we've realized how rampant they've become. You have a transformer sitting there, in your mind, it has 75% capacity. You go for routine servicing, you realize that it's now at about 95, 97. Immediately, so now what we've done is to actually find the pockets of areas that need immediate injection so that we can ease this burden on these areas as quickly as possible.
So that there is Samuel Dubik Mahama, is the managing director of the ECG. But today, a startling revelation by the Public Utilities Regulatory Commission, the PURC. In the report published last night, the commission concludes that ECG's claims that the outages were because of overloaded transformers was factually inaccurate. My colleague Kofi J, data analyst with our research desk, joins me right now with details from this particular document. Now, Kofi, the ECG complied with the directive by the PURC to submit evidence to back their claim that the outages were because of the 630 overloaded transformers. Now, the PURC analyzed the evidence submitted by the ECG. What did they find?
Right, so Evans, an analysis of the data submitted showed that out of the 715 transformer details submitted, 31 were loaded less than 70%. 595, which is the majority, were loaded between 70 and 100%, and 89 were loaded above 100%.
So if you're looking at it strictly, technically, only 89 out of the 715 were overloaded.
Now, the data also submitted by ECG was further compared to the total outage data provided by ECG for the period January to March 18, 2024. Now, the Commission established that 649 outage incidents occurred between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. That's the peak time. And of these 649 outage incidents, only 3 were planned outages relating to transformers.
And this is important because the ECG notice they put out that referenced the overloaded transformers talked about us expecting outages between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m., which is what the PURC is referring to. But PURC says out of those 647 outages that were directly, according to the ECG, related to the transformers, they only found that only 3 of these planned outages actually related to transformers.
Absolutely. And then the analysis also showed that the majority of the outages between 7 to 11 p.m. were as a result of load management operation by Gridco and fault related to overloaded transformers. Now,
faults unrelated to
overloaded transformers. So it's as a result of Gridco and fault unrelated to overloaded transformers. Now, the ECG's attribution of the outages between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. to transformer overload was therefore not factually accurate. Now, the causes of these outages are subject of investigation already being taken by the Commission.
Okay, so the Commission is currently investigating. They've come to the conclusion that it's not because of overloaded transformers, but they're now investigating. So what really is the cause? They're giving us an indication that the outages you've experienced is down to Gridco's own challenges and faults that are not related to transformers. But also in this particular document, Kofi, we are now also getting a better picture of the extent of the Dumsor and the outages experienced this year, and how ECG, according to the PURC, failed to comply with the law to notify consumers even when the outages were planned.
Well, so Evans, the Commission has established from its analysis of data submitted by ECG that there were 4,142 outages to consumers within ECG's operational areas between January and March 2024. That's the period under review.
And that when we saw it, it's a jaw-dropping number. If 4,142 outages.
Well, if you do the math, that's about 40 outages per day.
40 outages per day.
Yeah, that's within the period under review. Now, out of this number, 165 representing 3.98%, which is not even up to 4% of the total outages, were ECG's planned outages. Now, further analysis showed that out of the 165 ECG planned outages, 40 were supported by public notices, while there were no notices for the remaining 125 outages. Now, further, 38 out of the 40 notices did not comply with the requisite 3-day statutory notice prescribed under the regulation 39 of the LI 2413. Now, this indicates that in 163 instances of the planned outages, ECG did not comply with the law.
Yeah, I mean, these are really startling numbers. Beginning to appreciate what really is happening across the country when it comes to the power outages. 4,142 outages in the space of 3 months.
3 months.
January to March, recorded by the ECG that the PURC is now telling us about, with backing that with the evidence.
Yeah.
Now, we're also getting some clarity about the sheer number of bank accounts and investments operated by ECG, which has been a major concern for players in the power sector, especially as it relates to transparency with the cash waterfall mechanism. And we know that to be the pool of revenue from which all players in the value chain gets paid. Well, what are we learning there?
Well, so Evans, let's go to the document put out by the PURC, and they say ECG submitted details of 61 bank accounts to the Commission, together with instructions to the banks to furnish the Commission with the requested details. Now, by the expiry of the deadline, the Commission had only received details of 36 out of the 61 accounts submitted by ECG.
Okay, so 61 accounts they found. But this is important also because there is an IMF program that references bank accounts when it comes to ECG and how it manages revenues that it collects from all of us. What does that program say? We came to some agreement with the IMF on how we're going to organize the ECG accounts. Well, what does that say?
Well, this is part of the new structural benchmarks that we reached with the IMF. Now, if you go to page 17 and 18 of the IMF Article 4 review, which is 2023, like a complementary, document to the IMF program, it states that the government updated the Energy Sector Recovery Program, which is the ESRP structural benchmark. It's a new one. Now, it lays out wide-ranging structural reforms to reduce shortfalls and settle legacy arrears. Now, pending implementation of the reforms and renegotiation of arrears to avoid power supply interruption, the ESRP also spells out a short-term payment regulation between ECG and IPPs, which would detail, prioritization of flat monthly payment of sufficient to cover energy sector purchases costs. Now, if you look at page 18, which talks about, how ECG is supposed to comply with this. Now, according to the IMF, now the ESRP proposes to merge ECG's sub-account into a single collection account. This account will be audited on a quarterly basis, and the authorities will publish the final report of July to September 2023 and audit it by February 2024. Now, this report will highlight audit findings concerning, purchase invoices, revenue collection from ECG customers, and disbursement to IPPs, SOEs, and fuel suppliers under the cash waterfall mechanism.
So the agreement was that merge this into a single account so it can be audited. It makes it easy to reference, but also easy to track what is coming in and what is going out. PURC says they found 61 bank accounts. And even those bank accounts, they say that just over 30 of them have responded in terms of the details that they were requiring. But let's talk, since we're talking about cash waterfall, because that's really why the agreement was reached with the IMF to reduce the accounts into one. What did the PURC find when it comes to how the cash waterfall mechanisms has been handled by the ECG? We're learning a bit more about how much they owe, but how much they're left to pay in when it comes to what they were supposed to comply with from the PURC's directive.
So the Commission was very categorical. According to them, ECG partially complied with the Commission's order by honoring its obligation under the cash waterfall mechanism. And in fact, this is under the Category B for March 2024. And we know that the cash waterfall mechanism has two categories. The Category A has the IPPs and B mostly state-owned enterprises which supply energy. Now, the amount of 444.3 million Ghana cedis will have to be paid by ECG for August 2023 to February 2024, however, remains outstanding. To meet the PURC benchmark collection ratio of 98%, ECG should have collected tariff revenue approximately 8.8 billion Ghana cedis based on the company's declared sales. Now, to satisfy the temporary measures agreed under the cash waterfall mechanism, ECG was expected to collect 7 billion Ghana cedis to be allocated to sector players along the electricity supply value chain, which is Category A and B. Now, Evans, however, the total tariff revenue ECG declared to the cash waterfall mechanism to be allocated to both Category A and B beneficiaries was 4.9 billion, Ghana cedis. And now, out of this amount, 446.3 million Ghana cedis to be allocated to the Category B beneficiary remains unpaid by ECG.
Okay, and the PURC is now imposing sanctions. One of the key sanctions as it relates to the cash waterfall, they've now been ordered to pay 446.2 million cedis before or by 30th April 2024.
Absolutely.
Now, in the event of failure to pay the said amount on this date, the board members and management of ECG shall be held liable. In other words, they will be compelled to pay this amount from their own pockets. And so that's what the PURC is saying there in terms of the penalty imposed on ECG for partially complying with this directive. Now they have to pay 446 million into the cash waterfall. If you don't do that by 30th of April, the board members will pay themselves. Then also there is the failure to comply with the bank statements. There's a penalty that has been imposed.
No, so Evans, that failure to submit details of all bank accounts to the Commission by the stated date, the Commission hereby imposes an initial regulatory charge of 3,000 penalty units on ECG in accordance with the Regulation 45 of the LI 2413, amounting to 36,000 Ghana cedis.
And they don't stop. They didn't stop there on this particular one, because as we now know, this 36,000 they have to pay it by the 22nd of April.
Yeah.
And this is just next week. They have less than 6 days. They have less than 7 days for them to pay this amount. Now, if they fail to do this, for every day that the requested details remain outstanding, the ECG shall pay an additional regulatory charge of 3,000. So this is going to increase if they fail to meet this particular detail. And then let's talk about the bits that everybody has been asking for, the load management timetable. As we know, the PURC have told us already that they failed to comply with that directive, to produce that load management timetable to govern the transformers that he had claimed that the PURC now says is false. Produce it, they failed it, right? The PURC is imposing some hefty sanctions that the board members will have to bear. How much are we talking about here?
Well, so we are talking about some 5.9 million Ghana cedis. Now, according to the PURC, they are imposing a 3,000 penalty unit on ECG for each of the 163 breaches that amounted to the money I mentioned, 5.9 million Ghana cedis. Now, they were contemplating whether they should put this charge or this fine on ECG itself or the board members. Now, this was the the conclusion that they reached. According to the PURC, if they had placed this on the ECG, would have affected, ECG's, financial
bottom line. In
situation.
other words, ECG will have to pay with the monies we give it.
Absolutely. That's the reason why they decided to put this on each of the board members. Now, according to the PURC, board members are to pay into a dedicated fuel account under the joint control of the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Finance on or before 30th May 2024. Now, the Commission will validate compliance in tandem with the cash waterfall validation report and periodically regulatory monitoring. That's according to the PURC.
Oh, there's a lot there to unpack when it comes to what the PURC has done today with the ECG and the sanctions they've imposed and the findings that they basically told us on truths when they told us that the outages you're experiencing was largely down to transformers. I want to bring in Ishmael Ejukumhene, and the Ishmael Ejukumhene is a commissioner at PURC, but also executive director of KITE at the Kumasi Institute of Technology, Energy and Environment. I am also delighted to say that I've been joined by Dr. Kwabena Donkor, who is a power minister, former power minister under the John Mahama administration. But I want to start with Mr. Ejukumhene, because he definitely has more insight into this than any of us do, and I'm grateful that Mr. Ejukumhene, you can join me on this conversation. I see your signature as part of the commissioners who signed this particular document on the subject of what you found, what the commission found, that the true cause of the outages isn't overloaded transformers, but outages attributed to Gridco, but also something other than the transformers. You've indicated that you are investigating the true cause. Where are you in finalizing that particular investigation?
Good evening, Evans, and good evening to your listeners. So, as order in the total of 130 transformers. So, to be able to conclude all the investigations, we need to visit a reasonable number of them to be able to establish exactly what they is. So, they continue to be under investigation. I'm sure pretty sure before maybe the end of this will be in a position to definitely come out with things. But I guess the issues are here in the from what Gridco and ECG themselves are saying. They appear to be blaming each other, but Gridco was the first representative of Minister of Energy, and ECG also responded. So it's quite clear that it's got something to do with load management, which is out there. But our issue was that we were surprised when we heard about the 630 transformers because we hadn't been told by ECG. And so we demanded further and better particulars, and then they provided the information, spent a little resources to go around, and we didn't kind of confirm what they had told. So we decided, if you look at the order, it's said solidly in law with the relevant.
Well, unfortunately, we're having this interruption with your line. I'm going to call you on a better line, hopefully, so we can hear you. But meanwhile, I want to bring in Dr. Kwamna Donko. Doc, give me your reaction to this report by the PURC.
Well, it's...
Yes, Dr. Kwamna Donko.
Yes, the report is refreshing. It throws in a bit more of light into the public domain. But that is not surprising to some of us who have been in the industry. Virtually everything in that report we have stated. And so it's just validating what we've been saying. That one, there is inadequate generation. Let's make it clear. If you say you are blaming Gridco, putting it on Gridco, Gridco does not generate. Gridco is a transmission utility. For lack of a better expression, I say Gridco is a kayayi. Gridco will only carry the load that is being given. We have two major generators in this country, VRA and IPPs, independent power producers. So if they are not generating enough, Gridco cannot supply you enough. So if Gridco tells ECG and or NETCO that reduce your consumption, you reduce your uptake, and they don't, Gridco is forced to come in to do it for them. Other than that, there will be a systems collapse. Let's also appreciate the fact that ECG is responsible for 46% of the landmass of Ghana. NETCO is responsible for 64% of the landmass. But ECG's 46% covers around 80% of all power consumption. So that is very important. ECG is not responsible for the whole country. It's so important because I heard your researcher talking about the country. But for me, the exciting thing about this is PURC, the economic regulator, fining or sanctioning directors rather than the corporate body.
You agree with that approach?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My only reservation is the quantum.
You think it's too small, too high? Honey?
It's too high. I will still jubilate if each director was fined even 10,000 cedis each. Because at this time, the most critical thing is the principle that directors can be held personally and collectively liable. We can remove the veil, the corporate veil, and attack directors personally. Too often, people have assumed that directorships in state enterprises are just rewards for party faithfulness. But directors have duties enshrined by law. One of the biggest challenges for state enterprises, and I'm taking this angle because I'm also the ranking member of state enterprises, is the poor corporate governance. There are directors who hardly ever attend board meetings. Then there are instances where instructions are taken from outside the board by management. This will send the right signal to whether Jubilee House or Flagstaff House that you cannot run state enterprises by proxy.
Stay with me. The commissioner is back on the line with me, Ishmael Ejukuhimini. I want to ask him about that. Mr. Ejukuhimini, so what went into the computation of the 5.8 million CDs that the directors will now have to cough up themselves?
I think the order is quite clear on that. We looked at the number of breaches that were not consistent with the regulation, and there is multiplied by a number of penalty points. So that's the simple computation that we did, and we acted based on the advice from our legal directorate.
Since this was issued, have you heard anything back from the board itself?
I wouldn't know because the communication will go to the secretariat. So we haven't been briefed as to whether there's been any response, except that we know that the order has been received because somebody received it at ECG.
And I noticed that this is going to be paid into an account that everybody else can monitor. Is this the cash waterfall account?
Well, it's one of the one of the single accounts that is being created. As you can see, PURC is not going to benefit from the fine. We are not even a signatory on that account, and the whole idea is that if we can get some money to build that fund and get liquid fuels as and when necessary, that's what informed the decision as to where the payment should be made.
And the reason why you fine them is because in this particular case, it relates to their failure to comply with the directive to produce a load management schedule to govern the time that we had the outages when they said it was because of overloaded transformers. Do you still expect that timetable still be produced, or because now they've gone past that, you take the money and that issue is retired?
Yeah, so we as part of the regulatory monitoring, it's an ongoing monitoring exercise that we do. The reason why we zoomed in on the 630 was because of the public statement the managing director made. We needed to very quickly step in to understand what was going on. So if that is not an issue, then what it means is that reason is not tenable. So we need to really get to the bottom of the problem so that we address the problem.
And I'm curious on the subject of the true cause of the outages that we saw. You've said factually it is not because of overloaded transformers. You found that was factually inaccurate. In other words, what you're telling us is that ECG lied to us. Is there any penalty for that?
Yeah, it's part of the sanctions. If you provide false information to the regulator. So if we read the order carefully, there are 3 different infractions that we are asking them to. We are penalizing ECG and or their board on that. Yes. So if you look at the act, the order, yes, that is also being penalized.
So the penalties I see here, you're penalizing them for the tariff revenue collection, the cash waterfall, their failure to fully comply with that directive. Then you're also penalizing them for their failure to submit all the details relating to the banks that they operate. And then you're also punishing them for the failure to publish the notifications and submit same to you, which you ordered for. I haven't seen one directly related to the falsehood they peddled around the true cause of the outages.
It's in there because if the outages were not planned, if we say that the transformers are overloaded and we are re-injecting, then it means that it should have been planned outage. And if it's a planned outage, then the law says that you need to give 3 days notice before you can take out the supply. So they are all linked, and if you take your time and read it, yes, some of the sanctions are actually related to the information we received and how we were not satisfied with the answers.
So is it safe to say that this is priced into the 5.8 million that the directors will have to pay?
Yes, kind of.
And I need to ask you, it's very rare, and Dr. Kwamanonko says it's refreshing, It's extremely rare to see PURC bite this hard. You're really biting hard. In fact, to the point where Dr. Kabla says he believes the 5.8 is high-handed. You agree?
I think the numbers behind the computation we've demonstrated why we did that. It's up to that's the commission's decision, and I think it was well thought through. So let's see how they react to that.
Okay. I say that because in Ghana, we know what happens to the PURC and regulators. When they bite this hard, rarely do they bite, if they want to bite at all. But you're just not biting. You've bitten very hard. You can expect, some may expect, that the system may come after yourselves. Has that been factored in at all, yourselves and the others on the commission?
Evans, yes. I mean, we knew it was a difficult job when we were asked, and we remember some of the things that we were told when we were swearing in, that we have a tough work. So there's nothing personal. I mean, that we are just enforcing the law, and we need to be sure. We need to make sure that the right things are done. It's nothing personal, and I mean, whatever happens, we've signed up to do this work as regulators.
You anticipating, are you not, that the political system will react to this?
I mean, I wouldn't even try to get into their minds. But if what we've done, it's based on law, so.
Dr. Kamnadonko, you are a politician through and through. Do you believe that the system will allow this to play out until everybody else complies and pays the amount, considering the sheer level of exposure that has now come to this issue? Now we know this is a Dumsor, more than 4,000 outages. You think the system will sit back and allow this to play out?
Well, I don't know what you mean by the system.
Oh, the
Are you
political
talking
system.
of the executive?
Yeah, the
arm
executive.
of
Yes,
government?
yes, the executive arm of government.
PURC reports directly to the office of the president. It's part of the executive arm, and I doff my hat off for PURC for insisting. Yes, as Ajikumine said, it was based on the penalty points, but PURC can have the discretion. Instead of 3,000 penalty points, they can lower the penalty points. I want to see how this plays out. ECG directors can appeal. They can appeal to PURC for mitigation, or they can even use the courts. It's important we go through this to develop what I will call good corporate governance practices. But back to the real issue of load shedding. It is important that we agree that at the point where PURC issued these directives, we were load shedding. There was under-generation. And so we were rationing power. I can appreciate where the ECG management was coming from, trying to be more political than the politicians, trying to present ECG the best foot forward. But we owe a duty of care to be factual, both in politics and in public life. And for me, this is so important. And PURC has done a yeoman's job. And I expect all other regulators. You see, regulatory craft is not a beach walk. I always say, and I consistently say that, I've been a regulator before, that any regulator who is loved is probably compromising. Regulatory craft is not a walk on the beach. If regulators were up and doing, 50%, in my opinion, of the decisions that politicians, ministers have had to make will not even be there. They won't even arise. So effective regulation. And remember, about 4 years ago, I made a statement on the floor of Parliament on regulatory failure in Ghana. And that is why I'm excited. I said this is refreshing to see PURC live up to its obligations and duties as a regulator.
And you make the point I want to just clarify with Ishmael Ejokumhene. Mr. Ejokumhene, can the board of directors or any of the entities that you've indicted in your report, can they all appeal? And what is the process for that?
Evans, I think I will leave that for the legal people to. But I definitely anybody who is sanctioned should have a right to appeal. I mean, I don't know of any law that would say that you've been sanctioned and you can appeal. I think the Commission's decisions are appealable, including even our decision to set tariffs.
And as we speak, we still are experiencing outages. What are the next steps now? Does that close your regulatory supervision over the ongoing outages, or you can expect a bit more biting going forward as we experience the outages? We still don't have a load management timetable, although I slept in darkness last night.
We work we are all stakeholders in the industry. We are all working towards a common good. The only problem here is that PURC has been tasked to do a very difficult task where you are supposed to meet competing interests. Okay, so you have consumers at one end, you have the regular utility players at the other end, and how do you balance these two interests and make sure that everybody is happy? We have the board, the commission can be sued by anybody who feels that we are not doing our work properly. They can take us to court for not doing what we are supposed to do. So we will continue to work towards making sure that we play our role as regulators. You sit in the middle as a referee, and you need information to be able to take regulatory decisions and also communicate appropriately. So this is all that we are trying to do, and we hope that we'll be able to continue to do that to make sure that we get reliable supply of electricity and water.
You mentioned water. Many today saw your tough stance on the ECG and asked, well, for areas still experiencing intermittent supply of water, sometimes doesn't come at all, there's no notice. Are we going to see a similar stance taking on the water supply situation by the PURC, and how soon?
I'm sure we are almost close to finishing the energy issues. We'll turn our attention to water, but all the regulator needs is sufficient information. And then once we get the information, and we need to put out the relevant information out there, I mean, we wouldn't have got into a sanctioning regime, but for everything that has happened within the past couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. And that day is Ishmael Ejokumhene. He is a commissioner with the Public Utilities Regulatory Commission, also the executive director of KITE, and that is the Kumasi Institute of Technology, Energy and Environment. Earlier you heard Dr. Kwabena Donkor. He's a former power minister and member of the Energy Committee. Still ahead, the Public Utility Workers Union today have a strongly worded statement out about what they call the recent abuse of its Ashanti East Regional General Manager of the ECG. We'll tell you what they've been saying. Plus, we'll hear from Dr. Steve Mattel on the unfolding issues in the energy sector on the back of the PURC strongly worded report that we've just been detailing for you over the last 30 minutes or so. You want to stay with us for that. And we'll also hear from you. Also tonight on News Night, Attorney General's office begins processes to extradite former CEO of Maslock, Sedina Tamaklo Ationu, to face justice